Hello everyone, New York Games here with another video in the tutorial series of remaking the core version of Getaway Shootout. In the last video, we worked on the game state and working with the player starting order. In this video, we'll continue working with the game state and work on the current map. So we'll store the current map that the game is playing on and then jump to the next one when the current round is over. But before we get into the game state, we'll actually be working on the map manager, which will be responsible for creating new maps every time it is called. Because currently right now, we just have one static map, always instantiated in the scene, which is just this template map. And what we want is to then create more maps that are prefabs that we can store in our project and basically loop through them as we finish each level. So to start off today, I'll actually just create another template map, and this will be just map number 2, and we'll just have it for testing this sort of map manager system. So I'm going to jump to our prefabs, and currently we just have this one template map as a prefab, which is also currently in the scene. But the prefab is in the folder here, and I'm just going to duplicate it. And instead of naming it template map, I'm going to name it template map 2. And since this is just a testing map, all I'm going to do is to make one small change, and that is changing this map number to map number 2. And this way we'll be able to tell which map we're on, because otherwise it's going to be the exact same map layout. But on your own time, you can create as cool maps as you want, and at the end of this video, you should be able to loop through those maps. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is what I was talking about earlier, is creating a system that loops through these maps every time you finish a map level. So to do that, I'm going to create a new script responsible for this behavior, and I'm going to call this one map manager, and then I'm going to open up the script. So this will actually be a pretty simple script since our maps are saved as prefabs, and the functionality all we want is to just create this map prefab every time we start a game. So at the top of this script then, I'm going to create actually an array of prefabs. So array of game objects, and I'll call this maps. And these are going to be the maps that we loop through for each scene, or for each round of the game. And I should explain a little, the original Getaway Shootout game, I have this sort of looping behavior that maps are nicely ordered, and when you finish one map, it nicely goes to the next map, which is related to the previous map, having the same finish object and starting object. But in your game, you could do it differently with having random maps or having just one map the same every time. But I'll continue forward with this way. And the only other thing that I'll add for this map manager for right now is to have a function to actually create the map. So this is where we'll create the map, and we actually need to know some sort of map to create. Should we create the first, second, third, and so forth? And I was saying before, that actually is a nice opportunity to put it into the game state. So before we create this function, I'm going to actually pass in by reference the game state. I'll call it state. And we'll use the game state then now to actually know which map to create. And this actually isn't implemented yet, so I'm going to quickly hop over to the game state and actually create this new variable. So I'll create it up at top here, and I'll call it current map for the current map in the game. I'll save that. Now when I jump back over to here, we can now use this new created variable, current map, which again is going to be the map that we want to create. So if I do something like maps, the current map, that gets the current map. And what we want to do is to instantiate this. So I'll instantiate it. This just makes the prefab active, or not active, but it's created in the current scene. And for now, we really don't need to do anything else with the map, and instantiate it is good enough. So the last thing we have to do to create this map is to actually call it in the game manager. And first, I'll create a reference to this new map manager. So I'll do something like private map manager, and I'll create a reference, or I'll get the reference down here, and I'll do something just like get component, since I'll put the map manager on the same game object. So if I just do something like get component, that should work great. And now the next thing to do is to actually call map manager. And we kind of have a format set up here where we broke down each one into a separate function, create input, create players, create cameras. I'm going to do another function, and I'll call it create map. And all we want to do is to call map manager and call the new function that we created, create map, and pass in the current game state. So before we create players, that's where we want to create the maps, because if we create it after, the players actually need a reference to the first spawn point, and since the map isn't created, that would cause errors. So I'm going to do it before we create players, just create the map and save that. And now I'm just going to hop back into the scene, because now this is where I'm actually going to add this new map manager. And again, I want it on the same game object as the scripts object, or as the game manager script. So I'm hopping to the scripts game object and adding map manager. And I'll drag it actually near the top so it's easy to reference. And this is where now we need to define the maps that we want to play. So this is just an array, and we can set each map to that array. So the first map that I want to add is just the first template map. And then I'll add the second template map. So for right now, just 2 maps to test between, and we should hopefully see them loop between the 2. But at this point, one thing I'll do actually is to destroy the current map. So we start with the empty scene. But at this point, it should only create the first map, since we haven't done any of that logic yet. Okay, so we're getting error. Okay, so we're getting error here, which actually makes sense, because we're trying to find waypoint manager, and we're trying to find this finish object, which are both components on this map, which we create down here. So I think for right now, we'll do something like this. And I actually even had a note here, because I knew this was going to maybe cause some problems. But for right now, again, I'm just going to move it to this create map function to set these components, the references to them. So now this should work. So we create the map, and the map that we created, we should now have access to the waypoint manager and to the finish game object. So I'll save that again and jump back down. But with that note, I think it'd be nice in the future to maybe have it handled by either the map manager or some sort of map script, to keep track of the waypoint manager and finish object. For right now, I think that works fine. Okay, so we have one player that has finished. And again, now we load up the next round, and you see it hasn't done anything. It stayed at the first round, which is what we don't want. We actually want to go to the next map once we finish. So to do this, I'm going to jump to Map Manager. And when we create a map, I'm just going to increase the current map. That way, the next time we create one, it'll be the next map, and so forth. So if I do something like state.current map, and instead of doing ++, which would increase by 1, I'm going to do something like this, state.current map +1, and importantly, have the modulo sign with the number of maps, because this modulo sign is basically just the remainder of this current map state +1 divided by the number of maps, which just is a nice way of defining code to have it repeat and always be inside the range of number of maps. So the next thing to do is to actually test that, but I'm pretty confident that actually this sort of logic will work. And I actually want to do one more thing to actually get this like the original code, and that is in the original game we have the first time a player plays a game, it jumps to a random map. And currently, when we're going to game state, we just have the variable defined up here. So when the game state gets constructed, this current map is just going to be the normally defined number as 0, or just, yeah, it gets initialized as 0. And we instead want to have some sort of way of making the first one a random map. And we could do it inside this constructor here by doing something like current map equals random.range and so forth. But I'm actually not going to do it in the constructor because it might be nice just to have the constructor return the same game object every time, and then you do the randomness afterwards. So that way it's a pretty clear defined constructor and behavior. So instead of doing it here, I'm actually going to create the randomization here. And the way I'm going to do it is doing something like this. So when we create the map, the way I'll check if it's the first time, I'll do something like state.current map. And if the current map equals -1, then set a random map. So I'll do something like current map equals random.range. Oops. And something like how it's formatted 0 to map.length. And so now the reason why I did something like -1 is because now we should be able to easily check if it's the first one by setting in the game state the current map to -1. Something like that. So now when a new game state gets created, it always starts at -1. And that way we can easily check in the map manager here and set it to a random map like that. Okay. So now I'm going to jump back to the game, and now this is where we can test, and hopefully we should see. So it started with a random map. In this case is map number 2. Now if we go ahead and actually finish this map by one of the players getting to the end, it looks like I didn't get to the end of that time, the computer did. We get the next map, which is map number 1. And if we just finish it one more time, just to check it's completely working. Oh, looks like I was able to jump pretty far on that one. I don't know if that is a thing that can happen in the original game. I'll maybe look into the player movement code just to double check. But unfortunately, it seems like the player won twice in a row, so that into the game, which is something actually I'm going to change. So I'm going to change this max score back up to 3. So you have to have 3 wins to score. And now to test this, I'm just going to cheat a little and drag the player to the end. But I would expect it to be working at this point since it seems to be looping through. But this way I'll just check it by going twice. And now when the player finishes twice, we should go back down to map number 1, which was the original map. Okay, so that seems to be working. And that's pretty much all you need to have this sort of simple function like the original Getaway Shootout game, which was just one repeating track. And I'll actually, before I end this video, talk about some ways you can improve this system. The first thing is the maps. So the maps are currently referenced as prefabs. And one thing we could actually do is, instead of making them prefabs, is to actually, going to something like this, where we have scriptable objects be the references to the maps. And the reason why you would do something like this is if you want to add metadata to your map. So if you want each map to have its name, to have a description, to have an author, you could create these scriptable objects, which the first thing would be the prefab map object, which that way you can actually create it. And then all below would be description and all sort of other details. So that would be one possible change if you want to get more in depth. The other thing would be possibly to actually not even have this maps array and to actually have something similar to this setup where we load it from resources. The only thing you would have to make sure is that the map order would most likely be, I would have to double check the documentation, but when you do resources.load, it most likely does alphabetical. So the way you'd have to get around that is just name your maps like 1-map name, 2-map name, and then in the details actually specify the real name there. So that'd be 2 ways of just extending this simple map manager system for the Getaway Shootout game. I'm just going to leave it how it is since it does good enough for this simple functionality. And yeah, I'll end the video there. And in the next video, I'm not exactly sure yet what I'll get to. Possibly we'll actually finally get around to doing just a little UI work. So that way we could display the score and maybe have some buttons to navigate the game. But we actually are getting very close to having some sort of core version of the initial game that you could take anywhere in any direction that you want. And yeah, we'll see where we go in future videos. Thank you for watching.